Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to lecture number 4 of requirement engineering, and the course code of this course is CSE305. And in today's lecture we are going to continue our discussion on requirements engineering process tasks. In the previous lecture we started our discussion on requirement engineering process in particular, and as I said in the previous lecture that this is just a brief discussion of all those different processes or all those different sub-processes or tasks within our requirement engineering process. So we have a bigger requirement engineering process, and within it we have different sub-processes or different tasks, which when we complete, then we say the requirement engineering process is complete. But before we got to it, we looked at some of the problems with requirement engineering practices. And when we talk about problems with requirement engineering practices, then it does not only involve requirement analysts or the people who go and gather requirements or the people who specify requirements, but there are also some problems with our practices when the developers are concerned. So for example, as an analyst, a problem can be that the analyst was not able to understand customer requirements, or he was not able to properly document the customer requirements. Whereas from a developer's point of view, a problem can be that developers are too eager to start coding, and they don't actually give themselves enough time to go through the document and develop proper understanding of the document, because they think the requirements are going to change. So if they are going to change, so why waste too much time on it? And according to them, the main focus should be to deliver something to the client. So those are general some misconceptions about requirement engineering or some wrong practices that are being followed. And as we have said multiple times, as I've discussed this multiple times during this previous few lectures, that if requirements are understood properly, then they guarantee the timeful completion of the project, and they guarantee that whatever you produce are according to the client's needs and within the scope which would be acceptable for the client. Then we moved our discussion in the last lecture towards two of the sub-processes or two of the tasks within requirements engineering process. We discussed inception, and then we moved to elicitation. So very briefly, what is inception about? And we said that inception is when you try to know your client. You try to get the feeling what the client wants. And inception is nothing more than the few set of questions that you're going to ask. So inception is few questions that we ask from the client. And these questions give us an insight into what client wants. And before we actually even get to that what does actually client want, we actually want to know that who is the client. So who is our client? We want to identify the key person who is behind the request of our project. And not only the key person, we also want to identify other key stakeholders. And another thing that we try to achieve in the inception process is we try to establish the economic benefit of the project that we are about to do for the client, and what goals do they have in their mind. And finally, one of the most important thing that we do in the inception stage is that we try to establish the effectiveness of the communication process. So effectiveness of the overall communication process, that is very important, because we want to know that whether we are asking the right questions from the right person, because after inception we go into the elicitation stage, and if our communication is not at the right level, then we might not be able to extract the right amount of information or even extract anything from the client. So that was inception, that we ask few questions, we get to know our client, and then comes the elicitation stage. So elicitation is about getting something out of the client. So you have identified your stakeholders, you have established a communication process, and now you want to know what does the client want. And there are different ways of eliciting requirements, and as I've said that we are going to discuss in detail that what are the different techniques of elicitation that are being deployed by requirement analysts in the industry or in the literature, what are the techniques which are available. But we briefly talked about two different techniques. The first one was collaborative requirement gathering, and we said that collaborative requirement gathering, as the name suggests, is that you are trying to gather requirements from a number of stakeholders at the same time, so you are collaborating among different people. And there are different ways of conducting this collaborative requirement gathering session. You can have people sitting in one big meeting room. You can have a virtual environment where people are either chatting in a big chat room, or you can have a portal where people are sharing their thoughts. But the idea behind collaborative requirement gathering is that you have different stakeholders with different viewpoints sitting in a common place, and the benefit is that at times when people come from different viewpoints, they would have lots of conflicts in what they think about the system, and by making them sit together, you are providing them a mechanism to resolve those conflicts, and you providing yourself a mechanism to actually get rid of those conflicts and write requirements which are concise and which are consistent for all the stakeholders. Then another thing in collaborative requirement gathering which is very important is that you always set an agenda. And the purpose of agenda is that so that the client can prepare well, they can send the right amount of stakeholders or right kind of stakeholders who know who have in-depth knowledge of that particular agenda. And moreover, we also need a recording mechanism. For example, if we have a virtual environment like a chat room or a portal where people are sharing their thoughts, then automatically there is a recording mechanism. But if people are sitting in a big meeting room, then you can use either a whiteboard where you just write the thoughts of different people, or you hand post-its to all the people who are sitting in that meeting, all the participants of the meeting, and they write everything down on the post-its, and you can start pasting them on the wall, and by the end of the session you try to record everything which has been written on different post-its. So different benefits. The main benefit of collaborative requirement gathering is that you ask people to sit together, and it provides a mechanism to resolve conflicts. You need a recording mechanism, you need to have a proper agenda, there is always a facilitator to conduct this overall meeting. The second elicitation technique, which we very briefly talked about, was quality function deployment. That is more used in engineering discipline when we are making products, but that can also be deployed when gathering requirements for a software. And so what was QFD? We'll start our discussion with QFD, and then we'll move to elaboration phase. So quality function deployment, we said that it's a technique which translates the needs of the customer into technical requirements for the software. So we try to identify technical requirements of the software. It emphasizes an understanding of what is valuable to the customer, and then deploy these values throughout the engineering process through functions, informations, and tasks. So it's a stepwise process. We try to identify key clients' requirements, and then we try to identify different technical features which should be present in the product. And then we try to match those, that which requirements are conflicting to different technical features or which would suit some technical features. We try to define or identify relationships between different requirements and different technical features. For example, a client might want that the product is cheap, and if the product is cheap, then it might not have a certain technical feature. But if the product, if client has no bar on the amount of money that can be spent on the development of the product, then then it can have any feature in the product. So there is a mapping between what customer want and the technical features of the product. Then another thing which QFD does is that you can also evaluate your competitors. You can evaluate your competitors based on those technical features. You can also prioritize them. That, for example, there is a technical feature in the product that you want to assign highest priority to. So it doesn't matter whether it doesn't match some of the customer wishes, but if that is your highest priority, you need to achieve that. So there are different advantages of quality function deployment. We are going to discuss it in more detail when we'll come back to elaboration phase in the next few lectures. So what else does QFD helps us in? It identifies 3 different kinds of requirements. There are some normal requirements. These are the main objectives and goals of the product. Okay, and without which the product won't be complete. Then there are some expected requirements. These requirements are implicit to the product and system and may be so fundamental that customer does not explicitly state them. So there are few things which need to be there. Okay, for example, if you're making a mouse, then the mouse should be able to Okay, ये expected वाला part ज़रा दोबारा से करते हैं. Then there are expected requirements. These requirements are implicit to the product or system and may be so fundamental that the customer does not explicitly state them. For example, you are making a portal, then something which is already understandable, that there needs to be a user profile. Okay, for example, you are making a portal like, for example, Facebook. So you need to have a section where basically which allows users to authenticate themselves, and only then they can log in. So there are some things which are explicit and may not be said, but it also helps us in identifying that. And there are some exciting requirements, and there would be some things that would really excite customers. And if you include them in the product, then the client would be really happy, but if you don't, then it's okay. So there are different kinds of requirements. So QFD, it does help us in somewhat prioritizing requirements. Prioritizing in the form of normal, expected, and exciting requirements. So that's another technique which can be used or which may be used to elicit requirements from the clients. So what are the elicitation work products? What do we get out of this elicitation task, or what is the output of this elicitation task? And as elicitation might be different depending on different technique which is used, so the work products, they can be different. So the work products will vary depending on the system, but should include one or more of the following items. So they can vary, but it should have one of these items: a statement of need and feasibility, a bounded statement of scope for the system or product, a list of customers, users, and other stakeholders who participated in requirements elicitation, a description of system's technical environment, a list of requirements organized by function and the domain constraints that apply to each, a set of preliminary usage scenarios in the form of use cases that provide insight into the use of the system, any prototypes developed to better define requirements. So as it is said that it may not include all of these things, but it should have one or few of these things. So it can have, it might be that you are making use cases to elicit requirements. So one of the work products that you can have out after the elicitation stage is a set of use cases. So you have usage scenarios where you are saying, okay, students are going to use this LMS in the following ways. They are going to register courses, they are going to submit assignments, they are going to have discussions with the faculty, and they are going to view their results. So there can be different ways. So you can have a use case. You can also have a bounded scope statement. By bounded scope statement, we mean you can identify what are the different deliverables that you need to produce for a certain product. How much time do you have to produce these deliverables? How these things are connected with each other. Similarly, if you have made a prototype to elicit requirements from the client, then a prototype can be it can be a work product out of this elicitation process. So these work products, number one, what kind of work product would be produced after this elicitation task? It depends on what technique you have deployed for eliciting requirements, and it also depends on the system, what kind of system you were trying to make, and for what kind of system you were trying to elicit requirements. But it can be any one of these things, or it can be either one or more than one of these things that we have mentioned. Okay, so next up is the elaboration phase of requirement engineering process, elaboration task or elaboration sub-process. It is also termed as analysis, and by elaboration we means we are trying to elaborate on what we have gathered in the elicitation phase. And as something very important that I mentioned in my previous lecture, that these tasks, they are not sequential. So we need to keep this in our mind, that all these tasks, they are not sequential. So they are not occurring in this order. It is not a waterfall model. So you can do something like it, that you're conducting inception, you have identified some stakeholders, you start gathering requirements from those stakeholders in elicitation, and once you have elicited some requirements, you can start elaborating them. So all these things, they are happening in parallel. This is not such a sequential activity as this drawing may show. So do not get confused by the way these different tasks of a requirement engineering process are drawn, because they are not sequential. They can be parallel, and they are usually parallel. So in the elaboration phase, as I said, this is also called the analysis stage of requirement engineering process, and we try to do some analysis on whatever we have elicited from the client. We try to gain deeper understanding of the requirements. So what do we have in the what does elaboration task do? During elaboration, the software engineer takes the information obtained during inception and elicitation and begins to expand and refine it. So we have got some list of stakeholders, we have identified what client wants very briefly in the inception stage, and then we may have created some use case diagrams, or we have a bounded scope statement, and then what we try to do, we try to expand on it. So there are different ways of analysis, and we are going to talk about them, that how do we expand what we gathered in the elicitation phase. So elaboration, it focuses on developing a refined technical model of software functions, features, and constraints. So another thing that we said in one of our lectures is that requirement engineering, a proper requirement engineering process, it's a bridge between requirements and the design phase. So if you remember any software development life cycle, for example, the waterfall model, we used to have analysis, then design, and then implementation. So after analysis, we have design. So how do we move from analysis to design? If we conduct proper requirement engineering, then actually elaboration is the phase which actually acts as the bridge, because we delve more into the technical details of the system, and we try to come up with, when we are elaborating and when we are analyzing requirements, we produce different kind of artifacts, and those artifacts, they act as a bridge which takes a system analyst from just requirements to producing something which is very close to design. So what do we do? It is an analysis modeling task. Use cases are developed. You can also identify domain classes. You can also make state machine diagrams. So there are different kind of analysis techniques. You can do use case modeling, you can do flow oriented modeling, you can do class based modeling. So through these different kind of modeling, you can extract lots of information about what you're going to make. Okay, so let's quickly look at these things, and again, as I've been saying repeatedly, that we are going to talk about them in more detail when we will have special lectures on the analysis or the elaboration phase of requirement engineering process, and then we are going to discuss these things in a lot more detail. But this is just to give you brief introduction of all of them. And I know by now you guys are familiar with making use case diagrams, but let's quickly look at it from requirements. How do we do a use case modeling? So what is the step one? Define the set of actors that will be involved in the story. So who are actors? Actors are people, devices, or other systems that use the system or the product within the context of the function and behavior that is to be described. Actors are anything that communicate with the system or product that are external to the system itself. Okay. So for example, when we talk about our LMS, so let's say we draw a boundary of our learning management system, and we say that this is the boundary of my LMS. Now who are the actors who are going to interact with my learning management system? We know that there would be students who would talk to this system. We know that there is administration. Another actor we know surely are faculty. Then we can also put some, that maybe there is a machine which takes attendance of faculty, and that is also interacting, and it is updating that whether faculty is in the campus or not. So anything that interacts with my system, it can be a person, it can be another machine, it can be another software which is trying to interact with. For example, in our university, we have a couple of systems. We have one system which is built within the university, which is called CU Online, and then there is another system which we are using, which is the LMS. Now, the students' attendance, it is being updated on CU Online, and the teachers or faculty, they would take assignments, they would submit their lectures on the LMS. So there is another system outside, which is maybe CU Online, and that is also trying to interact with this system. So anything outside the boundary of what we are making. And how do we know the boundary? Because we said, remember, that one of the work products of the elicitation task is that we get a bounded scope statement. And when we say that we get a bounded scope statement, then it means that we are defining boundaries of our system, and we know what do we have to make and what we don't have to make. So there are few things that would be inside that boundary. So anything that is acting from outside, whether it's giving some information or taking some information, that is an actor. So what is the step two? We develop use cases where each one answers a set of questions. So we try to develop a use case. For example, we can develop a use case for registration. We can develop a use case for student logging in. We can develop a use case for a faculty member submitting, updating an assignment. We can make a use case for a student uploading an assignment. So when we make these use cases, then what we are doing actually, we are thinking more clearly about the system. For example, we might have written just one requirement that each student needs to register before he can access his LMS account. Okay, now, but what are the different steps involved in registration? So when we make a use case of this, and when we write the use case text for this corresponding use case diagram, then we will think more clearly about what do we need to do if we have to register a student, what information do we need to take. So this is just a very small example that by making a use case diagram, you get to know more about your system. So let's quickly look. So what are the questions which are normally answered by a use case? Number one is, who is the primary actor? The secondary actors. Primary actor is the one who actually initiates, or who is the main actor who is initiating that particular use case. And then there are a few other actors involved. For example, if we are making a use case for student registration, then student might be a primary actor because he's the one who is submitting his information for registration. But there may be a secondary actor involved, an administrator who actually validates that whether he is the right student or he is submitting the right information or not. Then what are the actor's goals? It also identifies that what is the actor want from this particular usage scenario. What preconditions should exist before the scenario begins? So specifically when we write the use case text, we mention the preconditions. And for example, in order to log in, for the login use case, a precondition is that the student should have registered. So registration use case is the login for is the prerequisite or is a precondition for the login use case. What main tasks or functions are performed by the actor? So a use case also helps in identifying that what kind of functions would an actor do in order to achieve his goal, and then what exceptions might be considered as the scenario is described, and what variations in the actor interaction are possible. For example, a student when trying to log in, he may not remember his username or password, so he submits an incorrect username or incorrect password. Then he would be asked to log in again, and he might do it a number of times, and then the system would say, okay, if you cannot remember your login and password, then supply us your, I don't know, some information, or give us your email address using which you registered on the LMS. So there can be multiple interactions involved by the actor. And what system information will the actor acquire, produce, or change? And a use case also helps us in identifying that through an interaction, what changes an actor would incur in the system. What information does the actor desire from the system? Does the actor wish to be informed about unexpected changes? So we also get to know that if there is an error, or there is, as I said, that for example a user is submitting wrong username and password and he is not being able to log in, then there is some information that is being displayed to the actor. But let's imagine that a user enters his login and password and he is not being able to log in, and the system doesn't even tell him that what's happening. So in this particular scenario, the actor obviously wants some information, wants some feedback that whether the user, why he is not being able to log in. So there are scenarios and use cases are helpful in answering these particular questions. So what are the elements of the analysis model? As I said, that there are different kinds of analysis that you can conduct. There is this scenario-based elements. They describe the systems from the user's point of view, and use cases, they fall into this category. So what are the two different kind of diagrams that can be used in scenario-based? When we talk about scenario-based elements, you can have use case diagrams, and you can also have activity diagrams. So these are the two different kinds of things that you can make. So you can have the use cases, and you can also have the activity diagrams. Because these are the two diagrams which actually help us in identifying that how and what kind of actions an actor would do in order to achieve a certain goal. Okay. And they model some sort of a usage scenario. The next kind of elements or next kind of analysis that we can conduct are class-based elements. So what class-based elements do we identify in class-based analysis is that we can identify domain classes. What do we do is we identify the domain classes for the objects manipulated by the actor. So example of an object which is being manipulated by the actor is that, considering the example of an LMS system, then whenever a student, so one of the objects that this student would manipulate is a course. So we have this one object which is a student, and we have another object which is a course. Now this student object, he is trying to manipulate the course. In what ways he will try to manipulate the course? He may register a course. Okay. So we try to identify that which objects are being manipulated by this by the actor. And then the next thing is that we try to identify that what are the different attributes of this object. So for example, when you talk about a course, then what can be different attributes of the course? For example, the course code. For example, CSE305. Now that is one attribute, and the course title, it can be another attribute. For example, we are saying requirements engineering, and then faculty assigned to, so we are saying XYZ, and then schedule of the course. So we are saying what is the schedule of the course. The classes are on Monday and Tuesday at 1 to 2:30, and then we might say that what are the prerequisites for this course. So the next thing is that once we have identified a domain class, by identifying the object which is being manipulated by an actor, the next thing is we try to identify the attributes. Okay, and that is so by doing so we have list of classes. But then what we would want to do is we would want to know that how these different objects interact with each other, how these different classes interact with each other. So we might say that student is also a class, is also a domain class, it is also an entity in our system. So what are the attributes of the system? Maybe student registration number, student name, and semester of the student, and the course is being taken. So a student and a course class is connected to each other, because a student, what does he do? He registers a course. So the next thing of this class-based modeling is, or class-based analysis is, that we try to identify the interactions between different classes, and we try to record them, that how do different objects or how do different classes interact with each other. So the next kind of modeling is the behavioral elements. So use case, a user state diagrams to represent the state of the system, the events that cause the system to change state, and the actions that are taken as a result of a particular event can also be applied to each class in the system. So when we are trying to record the behavior of the system, so one of the diagrams that is very useful in it are the state diagrams, which can be modeled for each class, because each class would go from one state to other state depending on the values of its attributes. So for example, let's look at our domain class course. So for example, our course is requirement engineering, and it is offered to, let's say, 5th semester students. So let's say that currently our current batch is in the 4th semester, and one of the attribute of this class is whether this course is offered or not. So this is, let's say we call that this is a Boolean variable, and offered, its default value is false. Okay, so the default value of this offered attribute of the course class is false. So if this class has only this attribute, then there are two possible states of this class. Okay, and when we are trying to model the behavior of this class, we want to know that what event would occur which would change the state of the class. So for example, one of the events that would occur is that there are few 5th semester students now, and this course is being offered. So we can say the event is that student or 5th semester students register this course, and then the value of this Boolean variable offered would be true. So we got to know two things from it, that we are building on our analysis. So what we already did in the class analysis is that we identified different domain classes. We tried to identify different elements or different attributes of those classes, and the next step we did, we tried to identify interactions between those different domain classes. But now we want to we develop our understanding about each of those classes, that what would be the different states of those classes and what events would change the state of those classes. So for example, we said that, let's say that the course class that we identified, it has an attribute whose value is false by default, and the name of the attribute is course offered or not. So and let's say we put a precondition that this course of requirement engineering is only offered to 5th semester students. So one of the event that would occur which would change the value of that attribute from false to true is that some 5th semester student are trying to register this course, and once they do, the offered value would become true. So we try to analyze that what events would occur which would change the behavior of my classes. So this is what we do in behavioral elements. We are going to again discuss this in more detail. The next kind of analysis is flow-oriented analysis. So what do we do in it? We can make data flow diagrams. And what does data flow diagrams do? Data flow diagrams to show the input data that comes into a system, what functions are applied to that data to do transformations, and what results output data are produced. So very briefly, what do these data flow diagrams are used for? If you guys remember from your courses on software engineering that DFDs are normally produced at, there are different levels of DFD. And normally we start with a context DFD, or some people also call it level 0 DFD. So what do we do in a level 0 DFD is, for example, we are making this LMS. So what we try to do is we say, okay, this is my main bubble or my main system LMS, and these are the boundaries of my system. Now, as the name suggests of this kind of modeling, flow-oriented modeling. So one thing we know that this is, in this case, we are trying to identify flow of something through my system. So we are trying to know that what do we do in this flow-oriented analysis? We try to identify flow of data. So a computer software, normally I ask my students, how do you define a computer software? So a computer software is just, it takes some data in and it produces some data out. And even if you think about a very simple system, for example, you're making a calculator, then you punch in some numbers and you, for example, you try to multiply two numbers, and when you press equal to, then you get the answer. And even if you have a very complex ERP system and you're putting in lots of data in it, and finally at the end of the day you generate a report, then you also get some data. So a computer system is nothing more than it processes some information based on some input that you put to the system, and it produces something. So it takes some input and it produces an output. So data flow modeling is a very interesting form of modeling, because it helps us identifying that what are the possible inputs to my system and what would be the outputs to the system. So, and this is the level 0 DFD. Then we have multiple levels of DFDs. For example, at level 1, the goal is that we try to identify how this data is changed from this input to that output. So for example, we want to know that there is one information which is coming to my LMS is the login information. So that is one data that is coming in. So I want to know that how this login information is processed so that a user can see that he is logged in. So for example, I might have a special function which basically authenticates a user. So that is the goal of data flow modeling, that we try to identify flow of data through my system, and by doing so I try to also identify what functions are applied in order to do this transformation of data from input to the output. Okay, so let's quickly look at a particular use case example, and this example is of an ATM system. So this is just to give you guys an idea that what are we going to do when we come back to this analysis phase later on. So for example, what are the actors in an ATM system? So we have an operator, we have a customer, and on the other hand we have a bank as well. So there are two main primary actors here, which is an operator and a customer. So what does an operator do? He would maybe start the system, he would shut down the system. For example, you guys must have seen that when you at times you go to an ATM and it says that sorry for the inconvenience, the ATM is under some service or something, because the operator is trying to put some cash into the ATM machine. Whereas what do a customer do? Whenever a customer goes to an ATM, he tries to establish a session. So what do a client would do? He would go and try to establish a session, and whenever a session is established, then something that occurs by default is that whenever a session is established, then a transaction would take place. Okay, so a client cannot go to transaction without establishing a session. So the first thing that a client does is it supply a correct PIN information, and once the PIN is accepted, only then a transaction can be executed. And what are the different transactions which can be done? So the transactions include, you can withdraw cash, you can deposit some money in your account, you can also transfer money from your account to another account, you can do your balance inquiries and other stuff. Another thing that happens when a client tries to establish a session is that he might enter an invalid PIN number, and in that case he needs to a message is shown to the client that you have supplied an incorrect PIN number, and the bank is also involved here, because whenever a transaction takes place, the bank is also informed. Now one of the things which is very annoying once you go to withdraw some cash at an ATM machine is that you supply your PIN number and the ATM is working fine, it accepts your PIN number, and you say, okay, I want certain amount of cash, and after making some sounds, the ATM would tell you, okay, we were not able to establish connection with your bank. Now that is really annoying. So this actually shows or tells us that there is also another actor, which is the bank. So a bank server needs to be up for us to withdraw cash from the ATM machine. If it's not the case, then we will not be able to get the cash, even though we have supplied the correct PIN number and we have given every correct information. Now this is just an example of the use case diagram, but use case diagram at times often omit lots of information. Okay, whereas when we write the use case text, then it's a detailed description of a use case. And it also tells us the things which are not visible looking at just the use case diagram. So for example, this is an example use case of buying goods. Okay, and for example, a user is trying to buy something from a portal. So what's the description of this use case says? It says buyer issues request directly to our company, expected goods shipped and to be billed. It is used by manage customer relationship with another use case. And what are the preconditions? We know buyer, their address, and needed buyer information. So a precondition is that buyer is basically registered. So this is one of the preconditions. That this is the precondition that the buyer is registered. We have his home address, and we know who the client is. And the success and condition, we can also write how do we think that this scenario would be successful, that buyer has goods and we have money for the goods. So what would be the successful completion of this use case is that the buyer, this actor, he gets the goods and we get the money. So this is our success criteria. And what will be the failed and condition? We have not sent the goods, so buyer has not sent the money. So if any one of these things, for example, if we have not sent the goods, then the buyer would not pay us, or if the buyer payment is invalid, then we will not send the goods. So this is a failed condition. Then who are the actors involved in this particular use case? So we have a buyer, so their buyer. We can have an agent, okay, or any computing facility which is acting for the customer. We have a credit card company. We have bank, we have shipping service. So there are 5 actors involved here. We have one actor which is the buyer. We have another actor which is the credit card company. We have another actor which is the bank, and we have another actor which is the company which is providing the shipping service. Because in order for us to successfully complete this whole scenario, we will be needing all those actors. There are a few secondary actors and there are a few primary actors. So what is the trigger? The trigger when this use case would be active is that when a purchase request comes in. So this is what I was talking about, that that a use case text normally gives us lots more information than a use case diagram, because in this description portion, in the steps we are taking how this particular use case, how the actor would interact with the system. So the first thing that the actor would do, he would call in. Okay, he would call in with a particular change, with a particular buying or a purchase request. Then the company, or whoever is the company resource who is attending the call, he would try to get the information of the client, his home address and all his details. Company gives buyer information on goods, prices, delivery dates and extra. For example, whoever is responding to the call from the client or call from the customer or buyer is, he tells him that okay, these are the prices of the different items that you are requesting, and we are going to deliver that in to you in this number of days. And the buyer then signs the order. So buyer then says okay, send me those dates, and he supplies his information, payment information. So what does the company would do? Company creates the order, ships order to the buyer. Company ships invoices to the buyer, and buyer pays the invoices. So the process is that a buyer calls in, company extracts the buyer information, then company guy provides the detail of the products to the buyer, which includes the prices and the delivery date and all those things. Then buyer signs for that order. Then the company tries to ship those products to the client. He sends the invoice to the client, and then the client or the buyer pays that. So these are the detailed steps. Now, what are the possible extensions to this use case? So, for example, in step 3, one possible extension is that company is out of one of those ordered items. For example, somebody wanted a pair of gloves, and you have seen in your stock that you're out of them. So, you might need to renegotiate the order. So, you might say, okay, we do not have this particular item, but we do have rest of the items. So, that is a possible extension. Similarly, buyer signs for the order, buyer pays directly with the credit card. So another extension here is that rather than waiting for the invoice, a client or a buyer directly pays with the credit card. So the company, so there would be a change then. Similarly, at 7A, buyer return goods. So another thing might happen that in step 7, when buyers get the invoice and he pays for the invoice, he sees that he doesn't like the items. So he may return all those goods and he doesn't pay for the invoice. Then how would you handle those return goods? So there are lots of, so you can see that when we write detailed description of a use case, we do very in-depth analysis. We not only try to identify what are the different steps involved in this particular use case or in this usage scenario, we also try to identify what are the possible variations or what are the extensions to this scenario. And then there may be some variations also involved. For example, in step 1, one variation can be a buyer may use phone, he may fax this information, he may, for example, if you have a website where some buyer can use an online shopping cart to select the items that he wants to purchase, then that's another way of supplying information. Similarly, another variation at step 7 is buyer may pay by cash or money order, by check or credit card. So you need to be, there are variations involved. And what are the exceptions? So for example, the exception lies in one of the extensions. For example, we said that one of the extension is that a buyer may pay with the credit card. So an exception can occur that credit card is not accepted. For example, the information supplied by the buyer is incorrect. So in that case, this transaction would cancel, and you need to also do that. What do you do that? So what are the other information that are associated with this particular use case? For example, we are setting some limitations for us that we have only 5 minutes for the order and 45 days until paid, and expect 200 per day. So you can see that this is actually quantifying our requirements. So when we are trying to do further analysis of requirements, it is actually giving us more information. So we know that in order to process, we need to order, what is the minimum or maximum amount of time we can take to process our order. So we are saying that it will take us 5 minutes to process an order. This is the upper limit. Then we are also saying that we need to close all the invoices within 45 days. So if an invoice is still unpaid after 45 days, then we need to do something about it. Similarly, we are saying that how many orders we might expect every day. So we are saying we might expect 200 orders every day. So 200 and into 5 minutes for each order you can calculate that, you know, how efficient your system needs to be. So by doing this kind of analysis, you can clearly see that we are gaining more insight. Okay, now imagine what kind of requirement a user would tell you. For example, you are making this this website for a client, and he says that I want to sell products online, and he just say that somebody might call in or somebody might use my website to purchase items. Okay, so one of the requirement is that an online shopping cart. Now look at how much amount of information is actually hidden behind that one requirement, and you will only get to see it once you expand it, once you try to create the usage scenario of that particular requirement, that purchasing item from the website. So you can imagine that how this analysis is helpful. Similarly, what are the open issues? So you also try to identify that what are the things which are not being answered by this particular usage scenario. So what if we have part what if we have part of the order? What if the credit card is stolen? So, you know, we do not have supplied answers to these questions that say, for example, as I said, that one of the exception is that, or one of the variations or extension was that you are out of stock for a certain particular item and you only can fulfill the order partly. So what would happen then? And similarly, if the credit card information that is supplied to you, it's incorrect, or it's in somebody else's name, so what would you do then? So maybe you would go and talk to the client, okay, that we have thought about what you said, and these are the things which are still open. So what do you want us to do in our implementation that one of these things happen? For example, if we find that credit card is stolen, do you want us to inform it to you or inform it to some authority? What would happen? So just by looking at these two examples, we can appreciate that if we put some information in our analysis phase, then we get deeper understanding about the problem. And as a designer or as a developer, once you do that, or as an analyst, when you become a part of this overall process, then you identify not only what are the possible variations in the scenarios which are told to you by client, you also identify different exceptions, and you also identify different open issues which you can go and take with you when you go and negotiate requirements with the client. So we have seen the elaboration task of the requirements engineering process, and as I have said that we have just identified and we have just highlighted what are the different kind of analysis techniques which can be applied when we are doing requirement analysis or when we are elaborating requirements. So there are 4 possible analysis techniques. So the first one is scenario based modeling or scenario based analysis. The other one is class based analysis. The other one is flow oriented analysis, and then we have a behavioral analysis. So there are few things which we need to take into account is that so this does not actually mean that you would be going through all these types of analysis when you are elaborating requirement. It depends on the complexity of the system, and it depends on what you need in a particular scenario. So try to remember this, that whenever we talk about a process, then we are not imposing a process on every requirement engineering scenario. So it depends on the context, what kind of software you're making, how big is the software, what is the complexity of the software, what kind of client you are dealing with, and what is your understanding of the problem. And depending on that, you might use one of these analysis techniques and you might use multiple techniques. And within all of these analysis techniques, we saw that when we talk about scenario-based modeling, then there are 2 kinds of diagrams or 2 kinds of things we can do. We can make use case diagrams and we can make activity diagrams. Similarly, what we do in class-based analysis, we try to identify classes, we try to identify attributes of our classes, and then we try to identify relationship between different classes. So we do these things in class-based modeling. And what do we do in flow-oriented modeling is that we try to identify flow of data through our system. And whenever data is flowing from our system, so you take something in and you process it, you change it somehow, and you produce an output. So for example, if I make a program and whatever I enter to my program, I just output the same thing. Now that is not something very interesting, and I won't be interested in actually looking at that function. But whereas if my program is doing something really interesting, then what I would want to know that how this information is processed, what function has been applied to my input in order to produce that particular output. So when we apply flow-oriented modeling, we identify the data that is coming into my system and going out from my system, and what functions are applied in order to get that particular output. And the final one was behavioral modeling, and in case of behavioral modeling, we said that we try to know the behavior of our classes in particular. So we can make state diagrams. So what does a state diagram does? It tells us what are the different possible states of my classes, and depending on what event, what would be state of my class. So we gave an example of the course class where one of the variable was offered, and we said it can have two possible values, false and true. If the course is offered, then it is true, otherwise it's false. So we would try to know that what event would change that particular attribute and change the behavior or state of my class. And towards the end of the discussion on the elaboration phase, we talked in detail about, we looked at a particular example of a use case, and we tried to establish that depending on the amount of analysis you conduct, your information or your insight into the system, it increases. We saw an example of an ATM use case, and we did it through a use case diagram, and then we looked at another use case which was purchasing. A buyer is trying to purchase something from us. He can do it either on the phone or through a website or through fax or anything. So we looked at the other use case, which was a written, or which was description of that use case. And when we write a use case, we put lots more information. We try to, at times when we make a use case diagram, we omit lots of information. Whereas when we make a use case, when we write description of a use case, then in detail we write steps, that what steps you would do in order to achieve what the actor is trying to do. And obviously when we are writing, when we are writing use case description, we are putting more information and we are doing more analysis. Then we identify lots more things. We identify in detail different steps. We identify what are the possible variations, what are the exceptions that can occur. We also identify what are the open issues. Because the next phase which follows elaboration is this negotiation phase. And if you look at the ordering of these different tasks in this requirement engineering process, then they are beautifully placed. For example, you do inception, where we identify the client, we identify the stakeholder, what he wants, what are his goals. And then we go to elicitation. We try to ask, or we try to elicit particular requirements. We try to identify scope of our system. And then whatever we have gathered in solicitation, in analysis, we try to gain more deeper understanding into it. And by doing that analysis, we identify, okay, what were the things which are not clearly mentioned by the client? And then comes this negotiation phase. So you will only be able to negotiate well with the client if you have proper understanding of the problem that you're solving. And in order to do that, you need to do good analysis. For example, few of the open issues that we saw at the end of our use case example was that what if the credit card is stolen? Or what if you have partial order, you do not have all the items that the buyer wants to buy from you? So these things were not clearly mentioned by the client. So when you go and negotiate with the client, and when you ask these kind of questions, then this would only increase your appreciation. So what would happen is that once you ask these kind of questions, then the client would be really happy that you have spent some time on it and you have analyzed my requirements, and by doing so, you would get very clear and very specific requirements about what you need to do. So let's look at what do we do in negotiation. So during negotiation, the software engineer, he reconciles the conflicts between what the customer wants and what can be achieved given limited business resources. Requirements are ranked, that is prioritized by the customers, users and other stakeholders. Risks associated with each requirements are identified and analyzed. Rough guesses of development effort are made and used to assess the impact of each requirement on project cost and delivery time. Using an iterative approach, requirements are eliminated, combined or modified so that each party achieves some measure of satisfaction. So you can see there are lots of different things happening here. So first thing we are trying to do is we are trying to resolve conflicts. So that is the biggest goal of negotiation, because customer would have told you something and you have identified something else, and there might be because you gathered requirements from multiple stakeholders, you identified that half or 50% of the people want something else, whereas the other 50% they want some feature in a different way. So you have a conflict. You either have conflicted requirements, or you might realize that there are some things which which clients want, they cannot be done in this limited amount of time, or in this with the resources which are being assigned to this particular project. So the biggest goal of negotiation is to get rid of those conflicts. Then another important step that is taken in negotiation is requirement prioritization. Now, why do we need to prioritize requirements? Especially in this environment, in this agile environment which we are part of these days, is that we produce softwares in increments. So lots of these small companies which are popping up, especially in countries like Pakistan, that lots of people are doing outsourced work, and the preferred model is the agile model. So requirement prioritization is key, because you really want to know what are the things which your client wants at the beginning. So prioritization should not only take into account what does the client want, it should also take into account the other stakeholders. And it should also take into account your opinion as well, because there would be some system requirements on which the core of the system would be built upon, on which the architecture is based on. So you really want to identify those requirements which are of high priority for the client, which are of higher priority for all the other stakeholders, and which according to you also need to be done first in order to achieve the rest of the functionality of the system. So prioritization is a very complex task. We will talk about that in later lectures, and we'll see what are the different techniques which are used in industry to prioritize requirements. It's a very good area of research as well, and different methods have been proposed in literature to rank requirements or prioritize requirements. And then the next thing which we do in negotiation is we try to identify what are the risks involved with particular requirements. And when we say we analyze those risks, we try to identify how can these risks be avoided, and what if this risk occur, what do we do then? So we try to do these kind of analysis as well. And the next portion is that we try to estimate that how much time a certain requirement is going to take for us to implement it. So that is the next portion of negotiation. So these are the different things that we do in negotiation. I think that's it for today's lecture. In our next lecture, we'll continue with our discussion on this negotiation task, and then we'll try to finish our topic on requirement engineering processes, or requirement engineering sub-processes, or requirement engineering tasks. So let's quickly recap what we have done today. So in today's lecture, we started with our discussion on the elicitation, and specifically we looked at what QFT is all about, which is one of the techniques that can be used for eliciting requirements. Then we moved our discussion to elaboration task of requirement engineering process. And we discussed what are the different kind of analysis techniques which can be applied when we are trying to elaborate requirements. And we said there are 4 possible ways we can elaborate requirements. We can do use scenario-based analysis, we can do class-based analysis, we can do flow-oriented analysis, and we can do behavioral analysis. And we looked at different examples of those. We looked at examples from the scenario-based modeling. For example, we looked at a couple of use cases, and we also looked at a use case diagram and a use case text, which helped us in actually appreciating that amount of analysis or amount of the effort that you put into analysis, the more understanding you develop about the system. For example, a use case text is normally more difficult to write than making a use case diagram, but when we write use case text, then we in detail, we not only write the different steps involved in that particular user scenario, we also identify the exceptions, variations, and we also identify different open issues with that user scenario. Then we moved to our discussion on negotiation, and we said that when we talk about negotiation, then negotiation is actually is very central, because we do very important things when we are negotiating. The first thing that we do is we try to resolve conflicts. So conflict resolution is one of the main tasks that we do in negotiation. The next thing that we try to do is we try to identify risks associated with each requirement, and then what we do is we try to prioritize So prioritization of requirements, that is another thing that we try to do. And we said that when we try to prioritize requirements, we not only take into account the customer's point of view, the user points of view, or the stakeholder point of view, but your point of view is also important, because you are going to develop the requirements, and you, through your analysis, you have gained some understanding that which requirements are central to the core functionality of the product. And the final thing, or the final goal of negotiation, is that you try to gauge that how much time or resources it's going to take to complete each requirement, so that you can have some rough estimate of the time and the cost associated with each requirement. So time and cost associated with each requirement. So that's another thing that we try to do. So so that's what we have done so far. We have seen 4 different tasks, or 4 different sub-processes of requirements engineering process: inception, elicitation, elaboration, and negotiation. And as I have said, these are not necessarily sequential. These things can happen in parallel. So I think that's it from today, that we have seen elaboration and negotiation. Inshallah, in the next lecture, we'll start our discussion from negotiation, then we'll move to specification, and we'll try to wrap up this introduction on requirement engineering processes. Allah Hafiz.